Okay, let's go back to the beginning. I said that I had my doubts, that I was skeptical. I was involved in this philosophy that said if it manifests one way on one level, it manifests the same way on all levels, and I decided to investigate. So I began to take a look at science and what it had found, with the idea, if this idea was true, if there was this continuity, that science had to be going and find things in the same direction. And lo and behold, they had. Let's start with 1964, Bell's theorem. Bell's theorem, and please folks, you're talking, you're looking at a philosophy major. I don't understand the math. I look at the math and it looks like spaghetti to me, but Bell's theorem was a mathematical proof that in fact everything was connected. It was lauded as one of the greatest discoveries to date of the century, and would affect physics and particularly quantum mechanics from that point on. So let's go back a little further to 1935, to Albert Einstein and his two associates, and something called the Einstein-Rosen-Podolsky effect, or Podolsky-Rosen effect, however you want to look it up. It was a paradox. And what it simply stated, that two particles that had been in proximity and were separated by great distances, if you did something to the one particle, the other one instantaneously knew what was going on and changed accordingly. Now, it was a paradox because that meant it had to be aware, and the information had to travel faster than the speed of light. Distance meant nothing, but nothing can travel faster than the speed of light. All right? So it was a paradox. Now comes 1982, and a gentleman in France by the name Alain Aspect. And here's another one that you can Google and take a look at the experiment. What he did was split a photon. And the photons had pretty much opposite spins, and he took one of them, and again, distance doesn't mean anything, and he ran it through a magnetic field and deflected it. And instantaneously, as it deflected in, let's say, in this direction, the other one deflected in the opposite direction. If the spin on one had been clockwise, the other one instantly changed, and accordingly. Now, isn't it kind of remarkable that a little particle was aware of what the other particle was doing? If a particle could do that, it ought to be easy as anything for you and I to be able to do it. Now, this led people to believe that there was this underlying reality, that the communication did not take place on the physical reality because it would have violated the whole speed of light thing, but it was through an underlying reality that this communication took place, and therefore distance and time, and it did not mean anything. Okay. So now you will go into, if you want, on a lot of websites and Google things like non-locality. Non-locality is just simply saying that no matter where you are, okay, in the universe, there is no, at one level, there is no such thing as time and space. That everything is connected, okay? That everything is affected by everything else. And this pretty much goes along with an old Buddhist saying, I believe it's a Buddhist saying, Buddhist philosophy, which just simply said, if you break a blade of grass, you shake the universe. In other words, everything that you do has this vast effect on all the rest of reality because it is all interconnected. Now, what about the idea of guides and the existence of guides in another dimension or another plane of existence, however you want to call it? In order to get to where you could understand why that's feasible, let's talk about vibration, which I've mentioned over and over again. And we know that everything vibrates. It's no big deal. Physics knew that because anything's energy. But the latest, or one of the latest theories in particle physics is that these little particles are in fact made up of strings, little strings that vibrate. And the difference between things is the rate of vibration. Well, it also says this in this little book that I had that was published in 1912, way before any physicists were aware of it. It didn't talk about strings, but it did talk about the difference between things was vibration. That we look at 3 dimensions when there really should be a 4th, which is vibration. And it also talks about in order for string theory to be correct, they've mathematically worked it out where there has to be at least 11 different dimensions. And they said they could possibly be millions upon millions of dimensions. So lo and behold, that leads us to the point where you could say, okay, that we are being communicated with from another dimension. The difference between the dimensions is vibration. And if you can lift your vibrations, you can be aware of things that you are not aware of on the physical plane. Whether that be something that's psychic, or it be a person who is trying to make inroads in terms of making communication with you. Now, there's a lot more involved to it than this. It's very involved, it's very mathematical, and again, you're looking at a philosophy major. But it was these things, as I went through them, that gave me a great deal of confidence on the path that I was on. It is something that kept me interested, and it's still keeping me interested to this day. Science and mysticism may appear to be strange bedfellows, but they are closer than we have ever possibly imagined. And I'm sure that science will continue to find things that'll bring us even closer and closer in terms of that relationship. But see, I bring this up and I talk about this because everybody talks about science. If it isn't scientific, it's not valid, it's not real. Now, these things aren't conclusive, but string theory isn't conclusive. In other words, the indications that are there that they're moving in that direction, even though there isn't an absolute solid rock solid proof. I think it's important to recognize that. I think it would be helpful if the scientists were to take a look at some of these philosophies and say maybe they know something after all. But because of our egos, we get involved with one particular discipline, and we say, that's it. It's either got to be done my way or no way at all. So the philosophers are doing their thing, the scientists are doing their thing, and the old story is never the twain shall meet. But boy, they should. Maybe one would be an adjunct to the other and would be helpful to the other. I've certainly found it to be helpful to me, and I hope everything I've gone through has been helpful to you. These things you can look up, whether it's the Einstein Podolsky-Rosen effect or Bell's theorem. Look them up on the internet. I think you'll find them to be interesting. Don't look at the math unless you happen to be a physicist. Okay, from here we will go on, and I hope this has been of some help and has cleared things up.